It had been 5 years since my fiance and my billionaire brother dumped me in the slums. Now they had finally found me. And the first thing they asked was if I knew what I did wrong. I nodded numbly. I know I was wrong. 5 years ago, they were convinced I had framed Melanie, their precious darling. Together, they ruined me and sent me away. They forgot that I was Ethan's fiancée and Julian's biological sister. But now I was terrified. I had surrendered. I chose to obey as Julian suddenly slammed his glass onto the floor. You were never like this before. Even Ethan, the fiancé, who used to look at me with nothing but disgust, had red eyes. Please, Sarah. Go back to being the girl who cried and screamed. I beg you. It had been 5 years since they dumped me in the slums. Today they finally found me. I was crouching by a rusty public faucet in a filthy alley, scrubbing dirt out of an old faded bed sheet. A few pairs of polished leather shoes stepped right into the muddy puddle in front of me, stopping right at my feet. I looked up and recognized the face immediately. It was Julian Vance, my brother. 5 years hadn't left many marks on his face. He only looked more powerful, his sharp brows carrying an even heavier air of authority. Do you admit you were wrong now? I lowered my head, staring at my red swollen fingers. Yes, I whispered. I was wrong. Hearing my answer, his tense brow relaxed. Corner of his mouth even twitched upward into a tiny, self-satisfied smirk. Come home with me, he said. I nodded and stood up to pack my few belongings. But as I turned around, another figure stepped out from the shadows of the alley. It was Ethan Caldwell. He had come too. I hadn't seen him in 5 years. He seemed taller now, his jawline harder and colder. His eyes locked onto my face, his expression a complicated mess of emotions. Sierra, since you admit your mistake, you're still my fiancé. Our engagement is still on. I watched his lips move, the words floating into my ears. Fiancé, engagement. They felt like words from a past life. I nodded, okay. Aside from that one word, I had nothing else to say. During my 5 years in the slums, I had lost track of day and night. By day, I wandered through noisy, filthy streets, taking any under-the-table job that would buy me a single meal. At night, I curled up in a drafty shack, listening to rats scratching in the corners, and drunkards screaming in the distance, staring at the ceiling until dawn. All the life had been sucked out of me. Every sharp edge had been ground down to dust. Julian's Rolls-Royce was parked at the entrance of the alley. It was pitch black, polished so bright it hurt my eyes. The car started soon. The low, crumbling shacks and the eternal stench of rotting garbage were left far behind. The view outside the window became cleaner, greener and grander. Finally, the car pulled up in front of the luxury estate I had left 5 years ago. The iron gates opened automatically. The lawn was manicured so perfectly it looked like a green carpet. Everything looked exactly the same as in my memory. Yet everything felt completely different. Walking into the living room, the massive crystal chandelier cast a blinding light. The air smelled faintly of fresh lilies. Just as we stepped inside, a maid rushed over to greet us. Mr. Vance, dinner is ready. Should I serve it now? Julian gave a low grunt of approval. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, he turned his head to look at my way. Sarah, I had them make all your favorite dishes tonight. He spoke so naturally, as if his 5-year absence was just him stepping out for a short walk. One by one, the dishes were brought out. They were plated so beautifully they looked like works of art. Lobster, Wagyu steak, ruffles, caviar. These were things I had only seen on crumpled flyers, near trash cans over the last 5 years. Things that belonged to a completely different world. I sat down in silence. Ethan sat next to me. He picked up a silk napkin and naturally draped it over my lap. I was instantly terrified. Thank you, I gasped, my voice trembling. Thank you so much. I frantically reached out to take the fork he was handing me. The moment our fingers brushed, my memory short-circuit. When was the last time someone draped a napkin for me? Or handed me a fork? Was it 5 years ago or even longer? My mind went completely blank. Clatter, the fork slipped from my fingers, rolled across the table and fell to the floor, stopping right by Julian's leather shoe. The air in the room froze. I went stiff and purely out of survival instinct. I threw myself to the floor to grab it. My movement was so sudden and frantic that my knee slammed hard against the heavy mahogany table leg. It made a dull, painful thud, but I didn't feel the pain. I only felt pure suffocating panic. I was terrified. They would throw me back into the slums for being clumsy. I grabbed the fork, clutching it tightly in my fist. "I'm sorry," I whispered, scrambling back to my feet. My voice was so low it was barely audible. "I didn't mean to." Julian and Ethan were both staring at me. Their eyes fell on my white-knuckled grip on the fork, staying there for several agonizing seconds. Ethan spoke first, his voice empty of emotion. "It's fine." The maid silently stepped forward and handed me a clean fork. During dinner, Ethan occasionally placed cut pieces of steak onto my plate, his movements as natural as they used to be years ago. I whispered thank you every single time, forcing myself to swallow every bite. Julian and I were originally orphans. Later, we were adopted by different families. He was taken in by the ultra-wealthy Vance family. But the couple who fostered me only wanted a free, obedient maid. I studied like my life depended on it, got into an Ivy League university, and managed to get a job at Julian's corporation. After graduation, I was so naive back then. I actually believed that hard work could change my destiny. At the company, I found my long-lost brother. The day the DNA test results came back, Julian held me tight and cried, saying he had finally found his little sister. I cried, too, thinking I finally had a family. Later, I met Ethan and we got engaged. For a moment, I thought the misery of my life was finally over. Until Melanie Sterling showed up. She was my brother's darling and Ethan's irreplaceable first love. I found out she was playing both of them at the same time. And I tried to expose her. Instead, she framed me. She made me take the fall for corporate espionage, leaving me with a felony record and a suspended sentence. Black sedan drove me to the slums and dumped me there. The driver left me with one final message. "Mr. Vance said he doesn't have a ruthless sister like you. Don't ever come back." In the beginning, I tried to start over, but with a criminal record. No decent company would even give me an interview. I had to go to the most remote, shady factories to do the most grueling manual labor. One day, a machine on the assembly line malfunctioned. The new girl next to me froze in terror. I rushed over to hit the emergency shut-off switch. After a blinding flash of pain, I lost 2 fingers on my left hand. The factory owner claimed I was just temporary, under the table help, and had no insurance. Then they fired me because being disabled made me less efficient. After that, I could only do odd jobs. Washing dishes, sweeping streets. I took whatever I could get. I barely stayed alive. Sarah, Ethan's voice dragged me back to reality. I raised my head and realized both he and Julian were staring at me. I had unconsciously curled my left hand into a tight fist. "What's wrong with your hand?" Julian asked, his eyes narrowing sharply. I quickly hid my hand under the table, shaking my head. "Nothing." But Ethan suddenly reached over and gently grabbed my wrist. His hand was incredibly warm. Mine was ice cold. "Let me see," he said, his voice dropping low. I pulled back, but I couldn't break his grip. Julian had already stood up and walked over to my side of the table. Ethan gently pulled my hand up into the bright light of the chandelier. That hand was skeletal, covered in thick, rough calluses. And on my left hand, the index and middle fingers were completely missing, leaving behind ugly, distorted scars. Silence fell over the room like a heavy shroud. Ethan's hand trembled violently. Julian's breathing suddenly became ragged and heavy. I slowly pulled my hand out of Ethan's grip and hid it under the table. "Again. A factory machine," I explained calmly. "It happened a long time ago." No one spoke. After what felt like an eternity, Julian asked in a hoarse voice, "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at Julian and let out a tiny, soft laugh. "It's fine," I said. "It's not a big deal. It doesn't stop me from working." I meant it. Missing 2 fingers only made me wash dishes a bit slower, but I could still wash them. Sweeping took a bit more effort, but I could still sweep in the slums. As long as you were alive, nothing else was considered a big deal. Both of them remained silent for a long time. Eventually, they said nothing more and went back to their seats. When I returned to my room, the maid had already drawn a hot bath for me. The tub was massive, steam rising from the warm water, with fresh rose petals floating on top. The moment I stepped in, the warm water wrapped around me. I couldn't help but let out a long, shaky sigh. It felt so good. This warm, safe feeling compared to shivering and freezing public restrooms to wipe myself down with cold water. For the last 5 years, this was absolute heaven. Dignity, pride, self-respect in the face of survival. Those things were as light as dust. I understood now. As long as I could have clean water, a soft bed, and a life where I didn't have to worry about starving tomorrow. Forget admitting I was wrong. Even if they made me get on my knees and beg, I would do it gladly. The proud, stubborn Serafina advance from 5 years ago was long dead. The shell that remained only wanted to survive. After my bath, I walked over to the window and pulled the curtain back just a fraction. In the garden below, the lights cast a soft, warm glow. Ethan's car was still parked there. He was leaning against the door holding a lit cigarette, the red ember glowing in the dark. I used to hate the smell of smoke. It always made me cough. Back then, whenever he smoked, I would pout, snatch the cigarette from his mouth and crush it. He would always laugh, pinch my cheek and say, "You're so bossy." Ethan was staring up at my window. The moment he saw me pull the curtain, he froze, looking a bit panicked, as he quickly threw the cigarette to the ground and crushed it under his shoe. Then my phone buzzed. I picked it up. "I'm sorry, Sarah." His voice came through the receiver sounding incredibly lost and anxious. "I won't smoke near you again." I answered sincerely. "It's fine. You can smoke whenever you want." There was a long silence on the other end. "Didn't you hate it when I smoked?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. My brain scrambled to process this. Why was he asking that? Was this a test? Was he unhappy with my reaction before I paused? My brain scrambled to process Ethan's question. Why was he asking that? Was this a test? Was he unhappy with my reaction? My heart hammered against my ribs, a fast, frantic thudding that made my head throb. 5 years in the slums taught you one fundamental rule: when a powerful man asks you a question about the past, he isn't looking for the truth. He's looking for compliance. I was stupid back then, I said, my voice barely stronger than the hum of the air conditioner in the room. I didn't know my place. I won't ruin your mood anymore, Ethan. Smoke as much as you like. If the smell bothers anyone, I can just leave the room. Silence stretched across the phone line. It went on for so long that I thought the call had disconnected. Then came a sound that made my skin prickle. It was a choked, ragged gasp. Ethan was crying. "Sarah," he sobbed, the sound raw and broken. "Stop it. Please. Just hit me. Scream at me. Tell me you hate me. Don't talk to me like I'm a master. You're trying to appease." I stared at the silk wallpaper of the bedroom, completely bewildered. Why was he upset? I had given him the right answer. I had yielded. I had made myself small. "I'm sorry," I whispered automatically. "I'll try to do better tomorrow." He hung up. I sat on the edge of the plush, king-sized bed, holding the phone against my chest. The mattress was so soft it felt like sinking into quicksand. I couldn't sleep. For 5 years, I had slept on a slab of damp wood covered by a thin, moth-eaten blanket. The quiet of this mansion wasn't peaceful to me, it felt like the heavy, suffocating silence before a storm. At 4 a.m., my body clock forced me awake. I couldn't stay in that bed any longer. The air was too clean, the sheets too smooth. Slipping out of the silk pajamas the maid had left for me, I put back on the faded, oversized linen shirt and washed-out trousers I had brought from the alley. They were clean, but worn thin at the elbows and knees. They felt real. I crept out of the room, my bare feet making no sound on the thick Persian rugs. I walked down the grand marble staircase, intending to find the kitchen. In the slums, if you wanted to eat, you had to work before dawn. If I washed enough dishes or prepped enough vegetables before the chief housekeeper woke up, maybe They wouldn't throw me back out into the street today. When I reached the kitchen, the high-end stainless steel appliances gleamed under the soft night lights. I found a bucket, filled it with water, grabbed a rag from a side drawer, and knelt down on the cold marble floor near the pantry. I began to scrub. Back and forth. Back and forth. This was something I understood. Physical labor kept the mind quiet. As long as my knees hurt and my right hand moved, I was alive. What are you doing? A sharp voice shattered the silence. I flinched so violent that water splashed out of the bucket, soaking the hem of my pants. I turned around quickly, staying on my knees, keeping my head low. It was Mrs. Gable, the head housekeeper who had served the Vance family for over 2 decades. 5 years ago, she used to look at me with cold disapproval whenever Melanie complained about me. Now, Mrs. Gable was staring at me, her face pale as a sheet, her hands trembling, as she dropped a silver tray onto the counter with a loud crash. Miss Vance. Good Lord, get up. Please, get up. She gasped, rushing over to pull me up by my elbows. I shrank back from her touch, bowing my head lower. I'm sorry, Mrs. Gable. No, I shouldn't be in the main kitchen. I just wanted to finish scrubbing the floors before breakfast. I won't touch the food, I promise. Please let me finish. Miss Vance. Mrs. Gable's voice cracked. She didn't pull me up. Instead, she fell to her knees right beside me on the wet marble, her eyes swimming with tears. What did they do to you? What did we do to you? I blinked at her, confused. Why was she crying? Before I could answer, heavy footsteps echoed from the archway. Julian stood there. He was wearing a dark gray silk robe, his hair slightly unkempt. He looked like he hadn't slept a wink. Right behind him was Ethan. Still wearing the black dress shirt from last night, his eyes bloodshot, smelling faintly of lingering tobacco and rain. Both men stopped dead in their tracks when they saw the scene. Me, kneeling in a puddle of dirty water with a rag in my hand, 2 fingers missing on my left hand, crouching as if expecting a blow. And the senior housekeeper kneeling next to me, weeping. Julian's face went from pale to ghostly white. Sarah. Julian's voice was barely an audible raspy breath. He took a step forward. Instinctively, I dragged myself backward on my knees, my back hitting the base of the kitchen island. I'm sorry, Julian, I said rapidly, my heart racing wildly. I was just cleaning. I didn't mean to mess up the kitchen. Please don't be mad. I'll throw the water out right now. I'll go back to my room. Julian froze. It looked as if someone had stabbed him straight through the heart. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing painfully. You're the daughter of the Vance family, Julian whispered, his hands trembling as he reached toward me, only to pull them back when he saw me flinch. You are my sister. You don't scrub floors. You don't apologize for breathing. I took the frame up. I admitted my mistake, I corrected myself quickly, remembering that I was supposed to be the guilty one. I know I ruined Melanie's reputation 5 years ago. I spent 5 years paying for it. I know I have no right to be the young lady of this house anymore. Just let me work. I can be a housemaid. I'm very good at cleaning. Ethan couldn't take it anymore. He let out a choked groan, covered his face with both hands, and slid down the wall to the floor. The powerful CEO of the Caldwell Group was crumpled on the floor like a broken doll, his shoulders shaking violently as he wept out loud. Julian stood rigid, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles twitched. A single tear escaped his eye, tracing a path down his sharp cheekbone. Melanie, Julian said, his voice terrifyingly calm, though his eyes were dark with an abyssal rage. You mentioned Melanie. Yes, I murmured, watching them carefully. Is Miss Sterling living here now? If she doesn't want to see me, I can sleep in the servant quarters out back. You don't have to let her know I'm here. Julian closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, the cold authority of the Vance family patriarch had returned, but beneath it lay a hollow, bleeding ruin. Mrs. Gable, Julian ordered softly. Take my sister upstairs. Dress her in the finest clothes. Call Dr. Harrison for a full physical examination. And prepare The car. Where are you going, sir? Mrs. Gable asked, wiping her eyes as she gently helped me to my feet. Julian looked at Ethan, who slowly raised his tear-stained face from his hands. We are going to find out, Julian said, his voice dropping to an icy whisper. That promised destruction, what really happened 5 years ago. They left immediately. I was taken back to the master bedroom suite. A team of doctors arrived within 2 hours. They performed a comprehensive checkup, drawing blood, checking my vitals, examining my malnourished frame, and meticulously photographing the scarred stumps on my left hand. Throughout the entire process, I remained completely quiet and compliant. When the doctor touched my hand, I held back the urge to pull away. When the nurse drew blood, I didn't flinch. She has severe chronic anemia, signs of long-term malnutrition, old fractures in her ribs that healed improperly, and advanced nerve damage in her left hand. Dr. Harrison reported to Mrs. Gable outside my room, unaware that the door was slightly ajar. Furthermore, she exhibits severe psychological trauma. Extreme hypervigilance, emotional detachment, and profound submission responses. Mrs. Gable, whoever treated her like this didn't just break her bones. They stripped away her human soul. I sat on the soft bed, listening to the doctor's evaluation. Stripped away her human soul. I looked down at my hands. He was wrong. My soul wasn't stripped away, it was just adapted. In the slums, a soul was a liability. Pride made you starve, anger got you beaten to death by drunkards in dark alleys, hope made you go crazy. By throwing away my pride and my anger, I had survived 5 years. Around noon, Mrs. Gable brought me lunch. It was a gentle broth and tender chicken, served on china so thin you could see light through it. I ate half of it, then secretly wrapped a piece of the cooked chicken in a paper napkin when Mrs. Gable turned her back. I slid the wrapped meat deep under my pillow. It was a habit I couldn't break. In the slums, you never knew when your next meal would come. Stashing food meant you wouldn't starve if you were suddenly locked out or forced to run. At 3 in the afternoon, the front doors of the mansion slammed open. The loud noise made me jump off the bed. I tiptoed to the balcony overlooking the main foyer. Julian and Ethan had returned. But they were not alone. 2 tall men in black suits were dragging a woman into the living room. It was Melanie Sterling. She was dressed in a high-fashion cream-colored Chanel suit, her hair styled in soft, perfect curls. But her face was flushed with anger and panic as the bodyguards forced her to stand in the center of the hall. Julian. Ethan. What is the meaning of this? Melanie shrieked, her voice high and panicked. Your men snatched me right out of my studio. Have you both gone mad? Julian walked into the hall, throwing his heavy coat onto the sofa. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were like 2 pools of liquid nitrogen. Ethan followed behind him. He didn't look like the gentle, handsome fiancé I remembered. He looked unhinged. His collar was unbuttoned, his tie hung loose. And in his right hand, he was clutching a thick black leather folder. Julian. Melanie put on a pitiful, heartbroken expression, tears instantly welling up in her large, pretty eyes. Why are you looking at me like that? Did something happen? We found Sarah, Julian said quietly. Melanie's eyes flickered with a sudden, sharp flash of panic, but she quickly hid it behind a gasp of feigned surprise. Serafina? You found her? Oh, thank God. Where has she been? Julian, I know she did terrible things to me 5 years ago, but she's still your sister. I forgive her. I really do. Thwack. Ethan slammed the thick leather folder directly into Melanie's face. The heavy corner of the file caught her cheekbone, leaving a bright red scratch. Melanie shrieked, stumbling back and falling onto the marble floor, her expensive handbag spilling its contents everywhere. You forgive her? Ethan spoke, his voice vibrating with a terrifying, low fury. You fucking snake. Read it. Melanie gasped, holding her bleeding cheek, her eyes wide with shock. Ethan. How could you strike me? I'm your. Read it. Ethan roared, the sound bouncing off the high ceilings like a clap of thunder. Melanie trembled violently. She reached out with shaky fingers and opened the black binder. Inside were bank transfer receipts, decrypted email chains, recorded phone transcripts, and signed confessions from 3 former IT executives of Vance Corporation. Julian walked over, standing over Melanie like a dark tower. 5 years ago, Julian's voice was icy and flat. The core algorithm of our flagship project was leaked to our biggest competitor. The IP logs traced back to Sarah's laptop. The physical keycard used to access the server room belonged to Sarah. And you stood in front of me with tears in your eyes, showing me an audio recording where Sarah allegedly admitted to selling the data out of jealousy. Melanie's lips trembled. It was her. The evidence was clear back then. We reinvestigated today, Ethan cut in, his eyes burning with a dark, murderous red. With top cyberforensic teams from the government. The keycard. Swipe. Fabricated by the head of security, whom your father paid off with $3 million. The IP address? Cloned through a proxy router installed in Sarah's bedroom while she was asleep. And that audio recording? Ethan pulled out a pen drive and threw it at her. It was an AI voice synthesis. Created by a tech firm you funded in offshore accounts. Melanie's face drained of all color. The sweet, innocent victim mask cracked completely, revealing the sheer, naked horror underneath. No. Melanie stammered, scrambling backward on her hands and knees away from them. No, Julian, listen to me. It's a setup. Someone is framing me. Framing you? Julian sneered, a cruel, bitter sound. Melanie, we didn't just check the corporate leak today. We checked what happened to Sarah after we threw her out. Julian leaned down, grabbing Melanie by her hair and forcing her face up. Melanie gasped in pain, tears streaming down her face. When Sarah was dumped in the slums, I thought her stubborn pride would bring her back to beg me within a month, Julian whispered, his voice shaking with a terrifying mixture of agony and hatred. I waited. But she never came. Do you know why? Melanie sobbed, unable to answer. Because every time she tried to apply for a job, even as a dishwasher, someone called the employer and told them she was a convicted felon who stole corporate secrets, Julian growled, his grip tightening. And when she got a job at that back alley illegal electronics factory, who ordered the supervisor to disable the safety guards on the assembly line? Melanie's eyes widened in sheer terror. Ethan choked out, stepping closer, his knuckles white as he balled his hands into fists. You paid the factory owner $50,000 to ensure she suffered an accident. She lost 2 of her fingers because of you. Hearing all this from the balcony above, my mind went completely numb. I leaned against the brass railing, staring down at the drama unfolding below. So, it wasn't an accident. The malfunctioning machine that took my fingers, the sudden shift of the emergency guard, it wasn't bad luck. It was Melanie. 5 years ago, I had hated her. I had hated Julian. I had hated Ethan. I used to scream into my dirty pillow at night, cursing their names, wishing for lightning to strike them down. But sitting here now, hearing the truth laid bare, I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel revenge's sweet rush. I just felt tired. So desperately, intensely tired. Julian. Ethan. I did it because I loved you. Melanie suddenly shrieked, dropping all pretense as she realized she was caught. She grabbed Julian's pant leg, weeping hysterically. She was in the way. She was just an orphan you found in the gutter, Julian. She didn't deserve to be a Vance. And Ethan, she was taking you away from me. I loved you first. I deserved to be with you. She was nothing. Julian shoved her away with his foot as if touching trash. You destroyed my sister, Julian said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. You turned the brightest, most fierce girl I ever knew into a ghost who apologizes for taking up space. Julian turned to his head of security, who was standing at the door. Hand over every piece of this evidence to the federal prosecutors. Sue the Sterling family into absolute bankruptcy. Revoke all their corporate loans. And as for Melanie. Julian stared down at the weeping woman with cold, unyielding malice. Ensure her sentence is served in the maximum security state penitentiary. Make sure the inmates know exactly what she did. No. Julian. Ethan. Save me. Please. Melanie screamed as the bodyguards grabbed her arms and dragged her kicking and screaming out of the grand entrance. Her manicured nails scraped against the polished marble floor, leaving faint red streaks before she was dragged out into the waiting police cars outside. The heavy iron doors slammed shut. Silence returned to the mansion. Down in the foyer, Julian and Ethan stood frozen. The battle was won. The truth was out. The villain was punished. Slowly, Julian turned his head toward the balcony. He saw me standing there. Ethan looked up, too. Both men looked at me with eyes full of desperate, trembling hope. They were waiting for my reaction. They were waiting for me to laugh, to cry, to run down the stairs and hug them, to tell them that now that the truth was out, everything could go back to how it was 5 years ago. I stared down at them from the second floor. Then, I carefully placed my hands together in front of me, bowed slightly, and spoke in a flat, polite, obedient tone. "Thank you, brother. Thank you, Ethan. You have worked hard today." That was it. No joy. No tears. No emotional release. Just the hollow politeness of a well-trained servant. Julian's face collapsed. He clutched his chest, taking a sharp, painful breath, looking as if he had been physically struck by a sledgehammer. Ethan stumbled back against a glass table, shattering a crystal vase, his eyes fixed on me in utter horror. They had destroyed the villain. But they finally realized they had destroyed me, too. The following weeks were an exercise in bizarre, suffocating luxury. Julian canceled all his international business trips. He stayed at the estate every single day. Ethan moved into the guest house on the property, resigning from his active duties at Caldwell Group to spend all his time at the mansion. They tried everything to fix me. Every morning, the living room was filled with rack after rack of haute couture dresses, expensive shoes, and millions of dollars worth of diamond jewelry. "Sarah, look," Julian would say, his voice overly gentle, pushing a black velvet box toward me. "It's the pink diamond necklace you wanted 5 years ago. I bought it at an auction for you." I would look at the blinding stone, then immediately lower my eyes. "Thank you, brother. It's very expensive. I will keep it safe so I don't break it." I didn't wear it. I kept it neatly locked in the drawer, terrified that if I lost a single stone, they would use it as a reason to punish me. Ethan brought top plastic surgeons from Europe to examine my hand. Miss Vance, the famed German surgeon, told me gently in the private clinic, "We can perform a advanced cosmetic reconstruction using prosthetics and nerve grafts. It won't fully restore your dexterity, but visually, it will look almost identical to your natural fingers." I looked at the doctor, then at Ethan, who was standing by the door with anxious, hopeful eyes. "Will the surgery cost a lot of money?" I asked quietly. "That doesn't matter, Sarah," Ethan stepped forward hastily. "Money is not an issue. I just want you to feel whole again." I lowered my head. "If Ethan wants me to have the surgery, I will do it." "I'm sorry my hand displeases you." Ethan stopped dead in his tracks. He looked like he was going to throw up. That's not why I'm doing this, Sarah. I don't care how your hand looks. I just wanted to give you back what was taken from you." "Okay," I whispered. "I'll do whatever you want." The surgery was scheduled, but I didn't care. To me, it was just another command to obey. They tried to take me out to high society events. They wanted to officially announce my reinstatement as the heiress of the Vance family and Ethan's fiance. One evening, Julian hosted a grand charity gala at the estate. The elite of the city arrived in their finest tuxedos and gowns. I was dressed in a stunning navy blue silk gown that covered my neck and wrists. Mrs. Gable had styled my hair and applied light makeup to cover the sallow pale of my cheeks. When Julian led me down the grand staircase into the ballroom, hundreds of guests turned to look. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "That's Serafina Vance. I heard she was framed 5 years ago. Look at her, she looks so fragile." Ethan walked up to me, wearing a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He held out his hand to me, his eyes full of tender warmth. "Sarah, may I have this dance?" In the past, I loved dancing with Ethan. We used to waltz under the stars on the balcony, laughing until our stomach hurt. I looked at his outstretched hand. I felt a cold knot of dread form in my stomach. But I forced a small, compliant smile, placed my right hand in his, and stepped onto the dance floor. As the orchestra began to play a soft waltz, Ethan wrapped his arm around my waist. He held me gently, as if I were made of glass that might shatter at the slightest pressure. "Sarah," Ethan whispered, leaning down so his lips were near my ear. "Do you remember this song? It's the piece that played the night I proposed to you." "I remember," I lied softly. I didn't remember. 5 years of cold nights and deafening noise in the slums had wiped out those sweet melodies. "I bought a house by the coast," Ethan continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like we used to dream about. White sand, large windows, a garden filled with white roses. As soon as the doctors say your hand is healed from the upcoming surgery, we can get married. We can start over, Sarah. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." I let him guide me through the steps. "Left, right, turn." "Okay," I replied quietly. "If that is what you want, Ethan." Ethan froze mid-step. The music continued around us, couples twirling past, but Ethan stopped cold in the middle of the ballroom floor. He looked down at me, his face pale, his eyes filled with a terrifying realization. "If that's what I want?" Ethan echoed, his voice shaking. "Sarah, what do you want?" I blinked up at him, thrown off by the question. "What do I want?" "Yes." Ethan stepped back, his hands falling from my waist. His loud voice attracted the attention of several nearby guests, but he didn't care. "What do you want, Sarah? Do you want to marry me? Do you want to live by the coast? Do you even want to be here tonight?" The surrounding guests began to whisper. Julian, who was talking to a business partner near the bar, immediately noticed the commotion and pushed his way through the crowd toward us. "Ethan, what are you doing?" Julian asked sharply, placing a protective hand on my shoulder. Ethan ignored Julian. He stared at me, tears glistening in his eyes under the crystal chandeliers. "Tell me, Sarah," Ethan begged, his voice breaking. 5 years ago, if I asked you to wear a dress you disliked, you would have thrown it in my face. If I smoked a cigarette, you would have slapped my hand away. You had fire. You had life. You had a soul that couldn't be tamed by anyone." He took a step closer, sinking to his knees right there in front of all the elite of the city, clutching the hem of my navy blue gown. "Where did she go, Sarah?" Ethan sobbed, lowering his forehead against my knees. "Where is the girl who loved me? Where is the girl who hated me when I wronged her? Please, just hit me. Call me a bastard. Tell me I ruined your life. Stop agreeing to everything I say." Julian stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder trembling violently. He didn't stop Ethan. He looked down at his crying friend, then looked at me, his own eyes filled with a desperate, agonizing plea. The entire ballroom fell completely silent. Hundreds of wealthy, powerful people watched as billionaire Ethan Caldwell begged on his knees for a crumb of genuine emotion from his traumatized fiancée. I stood there, surrounded by diamond chandeliers, silk dresses, and the scent of expensive perfume. I looked down at Ethan kneeling at my feet. Then I looked at Julian, the brother, who had once been my absolute hero. For 5 years, I had thought that if I ever got the chance to return to this world, I would want them to apologize. I thought I would want to see them feel guilty. But looking at them now, I felt nothing. The guilt wasn't giving me back my missing fingers. Their tears weren't heating the freezing alleyways I had slept in for 1,800 nights. Their wealth couldn't unbreak the bones that had healed crooked in my chest. They didn't want me back. They wanted their own clean consciences back. They wanted me to forgive them so they could stop feeling like monsters when they looked in the mirror every morning. A strange, quiet clarity washed over my mind. For the first time in 5 years, the suffocating fog of fear lifted. I slowly reached down and unclasped Ethan's fingers from my dress. Then, I reached behind my neck, unhooked the diamond necklace Julian had forced me to wear tonight, and held it out in my right hand. I placed the priceless necklace gently into Ethan's trembling palm. "Ethan," I spoke softly. My voice wasn't loud, but in the quiet ballroom, it echoed with absolute clarity. "The girl who loved you didn't die in the slums." Ethan raised his tear-stained face, hope fluttering in his eyes for a split second. She died, I continued, looking him straight in the eye, the day you handed me over to the police 5 years ago while holding Melanie's hand. Ethan flinched as if he had been shot through the chest. I turned my head to look at Julian. And the little sister who idolized her big brother. I offered Julian a gentle, completely empty smile. She died the day you told the driver to drop me in the alley and never come back. Julian took a sharp step back, his face instantly losing all color. He reached out to grab my arm, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't let him. I took a step back, out of his reach. Sarah. Julian gasped, his voice cracking violently. No. Please. You asked me on the first day if I knew what I did wrong, I said, my voice peaceful, untainted by anger or malice. I do know. My mistake 5 years ago wasn't framing Melanie. My mistake was believing that family and love were indestructible. I looked around the grand ballroom, at the shimmering lights and the opulent decorations. I don't hate you, I said to both of them. Hating someone takes too much energy, and I am very, very tired. But I can't stay here. Every meal in this house tastes like copper. Every soft bed feels like a cage. And every time you look at me with pity, it reminds me of the night you threw me away. Sarah, don't leave. Ethan scrambled to his feet, trying to reach for me, but his limbs were shaking so hard he almost stumbled. We can fix this. We can go anywhere. I'll give up the Caldwell group. We can leave the country. You can't fix a shattered mirror by polishing the glass, Ethan, I said gently. I turned my back on the stunned crowd, on the weeping CEO, and on my billionaire brother who stood frozen like a stone statue. I walked toward the grand iron gates of the estate. Mrs. Gable ran after me with a heavy mink coat, crying out, Miss Vance. It's cold outside. Take a car at least. Take some money. I stopped at the heavy iron gates. I didn't take the mink coat. But I accepted a small, simple canvas bag from Mrs. Gable containing my original, worn-out clothes, my legal identification documents, and a modest sum of cash that I had earned myself from my odd jobs over the years. Thank you, Mrs. Gable, I said softly. For everything. I stepped out of the iron gates of the Vance estate. The night air was cool and crisp. The streetlight stretched out into the distance, casting long, peaceful shadows on the clean pavement. Behind me, I could hear the panicked shouting of men, the sound of car doors slamming, and the desperate calls of my name echoing through the night. But they were far behind me now. I walked forward into the dark, my left hand buried deep in the pocket of my thin jacket, my right hand swinging freely at my side. I didn't have a grand mansion to return to. I didn't have millions in the bank. I was a woman with missing fingers and a scarred past. But as I took a deep breath of the cold night air, my chest didn't feel tight anymore. For the first time in 5 years, I was no longer afraid of dropping the fork. I was finally free. 3 years later. In a quiet, sunlit coastal town 300 miles away from the capital, a small bakery named The Left Hand opened near the wooden pier. The bakery was known for its rustic, delicious sourdough bread and simple, comforting pastries. The owner was a quiet woman in her late 20s who always wore a clean linen apron and worked with a calm, methodical rhythm. She only had 3 complete fingers on her left hand, but she shaped the dough with a grace that made customers stop and watch through the glass window. One sunny afternoon, the brass bell above the bakery door chimed. A man stepped inside. He was dressed in a dark, expensive suit that looked entirely out of place in the laid-back coastal town. His face was pale, his hair streaked with silver at the temples, though he couldn't have been older than 35. It was Julian. He stood by the door, holding his breath, staring at the woman behind the wooden counter. Behind him, parked across the street, was a sleek black car. Inside sat Ethan, who stared through the tinted window, too afraid to even step out and walk into the shop. For 3 years, they had searched the world for her. When they finally found her, they discovered she had built a modest, quiet life all on her own, without a single cent of Vance or Caldwell money. Julian walked slowly up to the counter. His eyes were red, filled with 3 years of unendurable regret and agonizing loneliness. Hello, Julian whispered, his voice trembling. Sarah. The woman behind the counter raised her head. Her skin was sun-kissed, her cheeks full and healthy. The hollow, terrified look in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet, steady serenity. She looked at Julian. There was no terror in her eyes. No hatred. No resentment. Just the polite recognition one gives to a stranger from a distant memory. "Welcome," she said softly, reaching for a paper bag. "We have fresh sourdough. And apple tarts today. What can I get for you, sir?" Julian stared at her, tears finally breaking free and rolling down his cheeks. He realized then, with absolute certainty, that the little sister who used to cry in his arms was gone forever. The woman standing before him was complete, whole, and entirely independent of him. Julian choked back a sob, offering a broken, painful smile. "Just a loaf of bread, please." "Of course," she smiled warmly, wrapping the warm bread in clean brown paper and handing it across the counter. "That will be $4. Julian placed a crisp $100 bill on the counter. She looked at the bill, then gently pushed it back toward him. "Exact change only, sir," she said with a light, cheerful laugh that sounded like silver bells in the afternoon sun. "We don't keep much cash here." Julian swallowed hard, pulled out 4 dirty $1 bills from his pocket, and handed them to her. She took the money, dropped it into the wooden register, and handed him the bread. "Have a wonderful day, sir," she said, before turning around to wipe down the wooden flour board. Julian took the warm bag of bread, stood there for a long moment watching her back, and then slowly turned and walked out of the shop. He walked back to the car, sat in the passenger seat beside Ethan, and placed the warm loaf of bread on his lap. Ethan looked at the bakery window, watching Sarah laugh as a local fisherman came in to buy pastries. "How is she?" Ethan asked, his voice raw and hollow. "She's happy," Julian replied softly, looking out the window as a tear fell onto the brown paper bag. "She doesn't need us anymore." The sleek black car started its engine and quietly drove away, disappearing down the long coastal highway, leaving the small bakery and the quiet, free girl far behind in the sunshine.